Ted McCarty is a legend, incredibly smart, an icon in our business.
Ted McCarty was an innovator, brilliant, responsible for all these things that we kind of revere today.
He is essential to the history of the music industry. I don't know what would have happened if there had not been a Ted McCarty.
Some people have said that I am a legend, but mostly that's because I've been at it for 61 years.
Ted McCarty was a man who entered the music industry with Wurlitzer in the 1940s. He transitioned to Gibson and I think unintentionally guided Gibson and the entire music industry into what we know today as the electric guitar. I think the reason we want to share the Ted McCarty PRS story is it's a significant part of the evolution of our company. He was a teacher and a mentor to Paul, but he, to a large degree, with Leo Fender, was the foundation of all the music that we grew up listening to.
I think Ted, along with Leo Fender, were the pioneers of the electric guitar. Both of those two guys were responsible for, I think, the things we really revere today in electric guitars. He certainly was there in the golden era of Gibson, in charge of leading that ship.
He was involved in the development of the humbucker pickup with Seth Lover, as well as designs on the Tune-O-Matic bridge, integral part of designing the Les Paul, as well as the SG, Flying V, and ES335. Ted's involvement really in the development of solid body guitars in mass production was really one of the first guys involved in the development of it. So that speaks to our solid body electric guitar design today, and really all electric guitars.
He started working at a company that had existed for decades and had a strong name, and the founder's name, Gibson. Fender was founded by Leo Fender. PRS was founded by Paul Smith. His name wasn't on the headstock because it wasn't his company. It was never marketed. It never appeared on a headstock anywhere. So how would you know who he was?
I'm Sue Davis, and I am Ted's daughter. My dad was just dad to us. He was nobody special. He was just a good dad who really cared about the family and would do anything for you.
My mother died when I was 3 years old, and I was raised by the woman who was my grandmother's sister. And she and her husband took me in when my mother died and raised me. And he was an engineer at railroad engineering, not driving a train, but one in the office. And a very, very good man, and a graduate of the University of Cincinnati with a degree. And so they raised me, and I lived in their home until I was married when I was age 27.
He was raised by somebody who did and made things for a living, so it wasn't that unusual. I said, well, what were you gonna do if you didn't take the job at Gibson? He said, well, I would have been the accountant for the Brock Candy Company. And I'm like, wow, that would have been a loss is what I thought at the time,
My father had a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Cincinnati. I don't think he ever intended to work in the music industry.
I started at Gibson on March the 15th, 1948. It had been through the war and had been stopped from manufacturing during that period, and they were trying to get back on their feet and get going again, so they were in bad shape and losing money, and I was available. So Mr. Berlin, president of Chicago Musical Instrument Company, he asked me to go over to Kalamazoo and operate a little bit on some of his expense accounts and see if I could figure out what was wrong with the place and why he wasn't making any money there. Spent about 10 days there. I had carte blanche to anything in the place that I wanted to see or look at. wrote it all up into a little booklet, gave it to him. He digested what I had written, and he told me that if I could turn that place around and start making a profit with it, he would make me president the following year.
What Ted had dreamed about was running a company right. He wanted to run a company the way he dreamed about, not the way he'd seen companies run. And he wanted an opportunity to run a company his way, because he had seen a lot of things that he didn't like the way they were running the companies. So he was, trying to correct what he had seen in the past.
And that was too much to turn down. I could see the opportunity to go in and do the things that I had been wanting to do in my job before, but I never was in a position to really be the top manager. So we moved from our home in Winnetka, sold it, and moved to Kalamazoo.
So one day in 1948, my father came home and said, "We're moving to Kalamazoo." Whereupon we all laughed and said, "Where are we really going?" And he said, "Kalamazoo, Michigan." And so I was 8 years old when we moved. He would take us in to see the factory because it was an interesting place to go. He talked about the people that he worked with, and that he went out every morning and he would walk through the factory and say hello to everybody, and he thought that was important to see what was going on.
When I went there to start with, we had 150 employees, both factory and office. We had a loss in that March. I was only there for 15 days. And then the next month we had a small loss, and I was there for 15 years, and we made nothing but money for the next 15 years. We had this one little building when I started there, and when I left, we had 250,000 square feet covering 2 city blocks.
To me, it's just like scaling the business like that is amazing. He could look at things and just see solutions, right? So you look at this and that, here's a solution, and here's a solution, and here's a solution.
He was a problem solver above all else, I think. And he just came in there, made the place run better, and was responsible for some of those products that helped get them to that point.
Do you play guitar?
No, I don't play anything. I'm not a musician.
Ted did not play guitar, Leo Fender did not play guitar, but what he did inside of the industry gave the most historically significant guitar players a platform to perform from.
My father liked music. In fact, he loved music, but he could not produce music himself. He could not sing, he could not play anything, but he enjoyed hearing it. Despite that, he spent his life in the music industry, which he found to be very satisfying.
He grew Gibson leaps and bounds from when he started to when he left. And a lot of times good leadership is about leading people, not necessarily understanding all the processes and the details of what it is they have to do, but just creating the environment for them to be able to do what they need to do.
He left Gibson in 1966 and started Bixby. He was an entrepreneur. He made things for a living. That's what he did. And the guitar business was something that was familiar to him.
I had an opportunity to buy Paul Bigsby's company, and by that time I was getting to the age in which I thought it might be more interesting to me to have a small company of my own.
So the story of PRS and Ted McCarty really starts in 1986. To me, 1986 is experimenting, it's finding better ways, it's discovering that there are things like air sanders that can be used instead of little electric sanders, developing techniques, new ways of leveling frets better, new ways of rounding fingerboards better, new ways of shaping and using pantographs to shape guitar bodies and guitar necks, basically refining a craft. There's probably 40 people in the factory, split evenly in woodshop and the finish and final assembly. You've got to imagine a company that isn't sure it's even going to exist. It's only a year old and largely unknown at that point. It wasn't common knowledge what was going on in there. It's small, it's new, we're not thinking about a legacy, we're not thinking about history. We're just there every day trying to make guitars to the best of our ability. Paul was researching trademarks and patents. He was diving deep into the history of the electric guitar. He was trying to understand what had come before so we could better understand how to progress.
So I used to go to the patent office to do what's called a patent search, trying to figure out whether my idea was patentable. In those days, it wasn't computerized. You would get a big stack of patents out, and you would literally flip through them and look through them. Searching through the patents, I saw the Tune-o-matic bridge, I saw the Les Paul, I saw Flying V, I saw the Explorer, I saw all kinds of things. I kept running across two names over and over and over again, Leo Fender and Ted McCarty. Leo Fender, that was easy. But Ted McCarty, what was that? But that was, they were signed to Gibson in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I assumed he was the president of Gibson when I read it, but they weren't McCarty guitars at the time, they were Gibson guitars. And so that's when I first learned of his name. Early in the Guitar Factory. And this was early, this is 1986, 1987, this is early. And I'm sitting next to Clay Evans, who was then the president of the company, and I said, I think I want to call Ted McCarty and find out if all the things that I've assumed about how old Gibson guitars were made were true. I wanted to know, how could he be a consultant? It would really help us to know all the facts of wood buying, wood gluing, inlay work, pickups, you name it. We had so many questions. We needed help. We were doing it from scratch. And I was worried. I didn't feel comfortable dialing the number. He goes, call him. So I dialed him up, and his secretary put him on the phone. I told him who I was and what I was doing, and that I'd like to have him consult with us.
One day in 1986, I got a phone call from Paul Reed Smith, who I did not know. And he asked me if I would do some consulting work with him, if I would come to his factory in Maryland.
My father said he would be delighted to help because he was happy that somebody recognized that he had some knowledge that not everybody had. He kind of wanted my dad to come back to Annapolis, but my father was, by this time, he was legally blind and couldn't really travel and do that. And my mother was still alive, and she was not in good health and could not have helped him on the trip.
So Paul said, if you can't come to us, we'll come to you. So we made a date. He came to Kalamazoo, Michigan, to my little factory.
Then, as now, we had all factory meetings. Those all factory meetings were pretty small and pretty intimate. And that day, there weren't many of us. And what we would do on Fridays is get off work a little early, get a couple of cases of beer, and sit around and talk about what it is that was going on in the business. And I remember Paul bringing up Ted and just saying that he had made contact with Ted McCarty. I had never heard of Ted McCarty. He was completely unknown to me at that time.
So what was so interesting about Ted was that I had guessed about how it was done in his factory. And when I got to interview him, and I interviewed him for a long time, I got to verify all my guesses. And I got to find out what really happened. How did you wind the pickups? What kind of machines did you use? How was the word humbucking come up with? How did you use to glue the tops on? How did you glue the fingerboards on? How did you dry the fretboards out so the frets never stuck out of the side of the neck? How did you glue the binding on? What kind of glue did you use to put the fret wire in?
Paul was never only interested in what Ted did or what the decision was on a guitar. He really wants to know why that decision was made. There are so many reasons why a decision can be made in a time period. It could have been the material that was available or the machinery that they were limited to or something like that. So what they did could have been kind of more constricted, whereas if you know why they did it, you can apply that today and say, well, I have the ability to do it a different way or to make a different decision, but is the decision I'm making today furthering the sort of reasons, methodologies, philosophies of what they were trying to do in the period of time they were trying to do it?
And we asked and we asked and we asked till we got it all. And he got really angry. And I was like, what is wrong? Why are you so angry? He said, well, this is how I made my living, and nobody's asked me these questions. Guitar making questions. The only questions people had for me were, do you have a Flying V in your basement?
My father was very grateful to Paul for wanting to know and learn what my father had to teach. And Paul was very grateful that my father was willing to do that.
He was very responsive, very giving, wanted to help in any way that he could. There was a deal cut. I said, you know something, Ted? I need your help, and I guarantee you, you won't be the forgotten man. He said, deal, let's go. Because at the time, he was the forgotten man. We put him front and center in front of the entire press. He was very pleased about that and wanted to share it all.
Paul didn't know anything about running a factory. He learned it as he did it. To get Ted in and say, you know, you're doing this right, but you'd be better off doing this thing this way, figuring out how to streamline and improve the manufacturing process was invaluable, and that helped us take a huge leap. It's significant.
It isn't like Ted said, here are the golden, the keys to the kingdom. Ted just confirmed this is what we did. And Paul, almost in a reverse engineering mentality, was able to extract the golden nuggets from those conversations and build upon them.
Over the years of being here, just about 36 now, and knowing Paul all that time, there was no stopping Paul. That he would have gotten us to where we are now, regardless of anything. But I think that Ted shortened that time drastically. I think he helped Paul with production stuff, with design stuff, helped us get to the next phase a lot quicker than he would have been able to otherwise.
We talked anytime he had an idea that wondered about what a problem was on guitar making, he'd telephone me and discuss it with me, and if I knew anything that would help him, I would tell him about it.
We were going to move from Annapolis to Stevensville, and he'd moved his factories a bunch of times. And I called him up, I said, we're moving the factory, Ted. Give us the one piece of advice I'm going to need to know. You're going to get really mad. Keep your cool. It happened. Somebody had promised to do something at the new factory they had not done. I got really angry and I kept my cool, and I remembered the whole time him in my ear.
Paul shared with me that they had become really close friends, and that Ted had been really forthcoming about what was going on at Gibson in the 50s and how they handled certain problems and how they arrived at the innovations that took place then. Ted was really, really generous in sharing his knowledge with Paul.
My God, did he tell stories. I'll tell you one. First time he came to the factory, which he finally did, he was standing in front of the pickup bench. We said, Ted, where'd the word humbucking come from? He goes, I came up with it. We were like, what? He goes, I wanted my engineer to build me something that bucked the hum.
We started putting 2 pickups on them. Everybody wanted 2 pickups at least. And when you get 2 pickups on them, and then you threw the switch, they were both operating, and all of a sudden your sound would go right up to the ceiling. You couldn't stop it. You couldn't sell it that way. People were complaining about it. I went to our lab. We had a good lab at Gibson. Anyway, I told him what we've got to do is to get rid of this hum. We've got to get something that's going to buck that hum. One of our engineers worked around with it. Finally, he came up, threw it on my desk one day, and he said, here's your humbucker, Ted. They worked, instead of working in unison, they actually worked one against the other, like 2 single pickups in there. There was no connection between the one and the other. They canceled, that's right. They bucked the hum.
And I realized that Seth Lover was his engineer. The guy that came up with the humbucking pickup was his employee. I didn't, didn't put it together.
The one thing, and I was talking to Paul Reed about it today, and he agrees with me. We were talking about the electric guitar and the pickups and all the rest of it. And I said that I thought the big improvement that came about that made it possible for us to put really fine pickups on everything was what happened in World War II when the government came up with Alnico magnets. We had, prior to that time, before the war, they'd made pickups with this big, clumsy, heavy material that was in the guitar was heavy and whatnot, but it was not a real permanent magnet. Now, alnico, which was developed during World War II, is a permanent magnet, and it's small. It's you get a piece of it about the size of your little finger, and it will never lose its magnetism. So that made it possible for us to make pickups that were reasonably light, that had magnets in it that were excellent. Up to that time, we had no really good pickups. They couldn't make them.
So what was your proudest moment? He said the electric Spanish guitar, ES330, ES335, ES345, ES350. That was electric Spanish. I didn't know that ES stood for electric Spanish. By the way, those were prices. I don't know if everybody knows that. $175. He said a Super 400 was a super guitar for $400.
Well, that's another one of my designs. And actually, I was trying to do something that, as far as I knew, had never been done, and that was to combine the sound of a solid body guitar with a hollow body guitar. And so I came up with putting a solid maple chunk right down the middle of the guitar, inside the top and the back, and left the wings of the guitar out to the C-bouts. Those were hollow, and they could vibrate. And the top that was used on that guitar, that was a regular acoustic top and an acoustic back. And the end result was that you got a very beautiful mellow tone and an ability to get the sharp bang that you get out of a solid body guitar. It just took off. And even today, you go to a trade show, you'll see half a dozen people making them.
So Ted told me this story. He said he had a big stack of drawings that were drawn by an artist in Kalamazoo, a graphic artist. And they were all guitar designs. He said, we used to go through the stack and pick out the designs we liked, and we made them. I said, where's the stack? He says, I have no idea. I said, why did you make the other ones? He says, we didn't like them. Oh, here's the real good one. Why'd you do the Explorer and the Flying V?
One of the designs your best is the Flying V.
Mm-hmm.
Was that in part a reaction to how people perceived Gibson in the marketplace?
It was absolutely 100% because of that. Because we were being accused by some of our competitors of being a stodgy old company that never had a new idea in years. And I heard that, of course. Bothered me, and so I decided I'd just see if we can't come up with something completely out of this world that'll shock them all.
Leo was talking trash about us, said we were a bunch of old fogies, couldn't do anything new, so we did it to shut him up. Said, did it work? He said, it worked great.
I took a regular guitar, I took the top and the C-bouts away to the side, and then I went down to the tail end and made that disappear. We just didn't need it. And now, when I got through, I had the Flying V.
He told us so many things that we wondered about that we didn't know. But the best one was I'm sitting in Maui, because he used to live half a year in Maui and half a year in Michigan. And he's sitting next to me, and he kind of had this gravelly voice, and he kind of leans next to me. He goes, I saw a bar in the shape of a failure today. I'm like, what are you talking about? And after interviewing him, I realized he had been in a Hard Rock cafe. The bar was the shape of a Flying V, and in his mind, the Flying V, because they only sold 40 of them or 80 of them, was a failure.
All three of the guitars made at the same time.
That was the Explorer, the V, and the Moderne.
Yeah.
And did you take them all to the trade show?
Took them all to the trade show.
And what did people think of them?
And the people, what they did was talk about it. You'd see those crazy things they've got at Gibson's. And so then when the show was over, we checked to see what we had sold. We didn't sell any of the other two, but we sold a few of the Flying V. The people that bought it, the dealers that bought one of those guitars, didn't buy them to sell necessarily. They built them to hang in their window or to show to people and to get their attention. Nobody felt that it was ever going to be playable.
I saw a bar in the shape of a failure today. Unbelievable comment. But from his point of view, was right, because he wanted sales, you know. He had made this guitar. They were doing either batches of 40 or 80. He made a batch of them, and nobody wanted any more. As far as he was concerned, it was a failure. I told him, I said, no, Ted, that's a legend. He never brought it up as a failure again. Once I changed his mind that it was a piece of history and was important, he changed his mind. He wasn't one to go back and like calcify it an old way. If he changed his mind, he changed his mind. That was it.
Ted gave us a lot of stories and a lot of knowledge about the guitars that he made in the 50s and 60s. Similar to that, all of us that were around Ted have stories about him as well.
One day, I'd been down in Virginia, so I stopped off in Annapolis and talked to Paul and went through his factory and met all of his employees and spent 2 days there.
The first time I met him, I had no idea of any of this. I wasn't that interested in the history of the industry when I was in my 20s, I guess. It was just some little old man came in walking around with Paul, who was very nice, but I just had no idea of the impact that he had or the magnitude of him being there, talking to Paul, teaching Paul. It didn't hit me until years later.
So my first experience with Ted was he came to the factory probably in the early 90s, the first time he came and did a factory tour. And he was an extremely kind, nice man that I knew well enough to understand the amount of respect I should have for him. And so it was an honor to meet him. And I was one of the people that got to give him a tour and show him the shop. And that was a really big deal to me.
Ted's first visit to the factory, I remember seeing him. He was pretty dapper in an old-fashioned way. He had a cool hat on, was like dressed like a proper gentleman in a suit and a vest. And I remember him, you know, that famous picture of him like touching the guitar with Paul. I was in the finish hall when he was doing that.
The first time I met Ted was in the original shop. You know, he came in with his wide collar and his hat on, and, you know, I thought this old guy was cool. Being in the finish department, I was always interested in how they finished guitars, you know, in the 50s. But we weren't necessarily prodding him for that kind of information. He was just very genuine and wanted to share. Talking to him was always really nice because you know he was paying attention. He didn't blow you off ever. And he was interested in your experience building guitars just as he was interested in telling you his experience in building guitars and running a guitar factory. I really didn't know much about him, but it certainly piqued my interest to go, wow, there's a history here. It's not just us making guitars. There's a past. I think that's what Paul introduced us to, is knowing like the history of the guitar, not just in our little bubble.
Ted was really something. He was really something. He commanded a room. You knew he was in the room. A lot of people really enjoyed meeting him, talking to him. He loved to tell stories. He just smiled.
The first time I met Ted, I think was 93 or 94. And Paul had already had a relationship with Ted at that point. And he had visited the factory when we were in Annapolis and gave him the grand tour of everything. And we're looking at different models that we manufactured at the time. I knew who Ted was, and it was nice to share a few moments with him and look at some of the McCartys we were working on at the time and some of the different types of wood we were using for those instruments. And then after that, there were several times as a production manager where I was working with Paul and we had a problem to solve, and Paul would call Ted up on the phone, and he may have been in Hawaii at the time, and I really kind of felt like it was one of those times in life where I'm witnessing history in here, because I'm working with Paul, who is certainly one of the great guitar builders and designers of our time, and working with another guy who was associated with the golden era of electric guitars as well. So it was really a neat experience for me.
So at that first trade show with the McCarty model, there's always a Saturday dinner. There was a big dinner, there were dealers, there were artists, Paul's there, our team's there, and I got to sit next to Ted McCarty, which was awesome. After the dinner, there's an after party, and Paul looked over and asked if I would stay with Ted and hang out with him during that after party, and I was like kind of bummed out that the party's going and I'm sitting there. And so everybody got to go and have a great party, but we had a conversation that was amazing. And I was able to spend an hour or two with him, and he explained to me his logic, his history, stories, people. He described what made Gibson work well in the 50s. And from his perspective, it was the people, it was the teamwork, it was a mission, but it was also the things that I was working on at the time, which would have been components and processes, all kinds of interesting things to me. At that time, I was a production guy at PRS Guitars, so I just ate it up. And to be able to sit with the guy that sat through the 50s and to the mid 60s with Gibson and get all of that detailed information was pretty spectacular. And that was the best conversation I ever had with Ted McCarty. So it turned out to be an amazingly great night.
I think he loved the place. I remember Rob Cartney, one of our employees down in Private Stock, said it was such an honor to be able to talk to him the last time he was in the factory, you know. There was a real genuine care that had developed.
We became friends, both of us having a great interest in the guitar business. Actually, a real respect for each other, and as the years have gone by, we've become even closer together as understanding of each other and recognizing the position that we each have held in the industry.
I think Paul and Ted are similar, probably mostly the engineering mind, the inventiveness, trying to shake things up, and the problem solving. Paul is amazing at solving esoteric problems in guitar building, and I think Ted must have been that way too in both of his factories that he ran.
And what really happened was he handed us the baton. We were taking care of the things he took care of when he was making guitars.
The quality of the PRS is right up there at the very top. The guitar has to have the proper balance, quality of the materials, the wood, electronics, the proper construction of the neck, the frets, so that when it plays in tune. In my opinion, PRS is one of the best guitar manufacturers in the United States.
Ted McCarty was really associated with the golden era of guitar building. The instruments made during that time period, the craftsmanship, attention to detail, the way these things sounded, the value that they've held, had a huge impact on Paul and really his philosophy, not only behind guitar building, but the type of company that he wanted to build.
In 1992, we made our first Dragon, and that guitar was really the first evidence of the influence that Ted McCarty had on our company from my perspective. We were making PRS guitars a very particular way. The Custom 24 and what became the standard was what it is we were making. Then there was the CE bolt-on, but they were very derivative of the same thing. They were a platform to build from that was classically inspired, but very modern in the execution of the instrument. And so the time that I would say I recognized a real change in what we were doing was our first Dragon. 22 fret, stop tail, non-adjustable bridge. We started talking about plating or no plating. We started really concentrating on the thickness finishes and a lot of the things that are really very second nature to our day-to-day right now began happening right then. And those things were all very directly a result of Paul talking to Ted and starting to think about the whys of the instruments that Ted was involved with. And also conversations that were happening with David Grissom at the time. Those conversations had a huge impact on Paul and a huge impact on the instruments that we made.
One more question. What's your favorite PRS guitar?
So I'd say that the newest McCarty's my favorite. I've got the original pre-McCarty, which is sort of a guitar that I bugged Paul to death about until he relented and finally decided to make it. We just started talking on the phone a lot. Of course, me being in Austin, he was up here in Maryland. But we talked about ideas for, why the guitar sound a certain way, or what could you do to make the guitar sound different. And I think he never told me that anything I said was stupid, so I was able to say whatever I felt, and he always responded to my suggestions. So I was looking for something a little more vintage sounding. The standards that I was playing were awesome instruments, and they helped me find my sound. But again, I was looking for more of the Duane Allman at the Fillmore, Tres Hombres, a little more of a pure, clearer tone with a little less mid-range. And so that was the quest that when we started working on this guitar.
There was a tremendous amount of information that we were absorbing from Ted, that Paul was absorbing from Ted. Of course, it was bound to manifest itself inside of an instrument. And at the same time, we had a request from David Grissom for a guitar. And that guitar became the McCarty guitar.
They delivered the guitar to me at NAMM it was January '93, the NAMM show in Anaheim. And it was the first time I saw the guitar and played it, and all the dealers had a chance to play it. And there was quite a buzz about it. And it was exciting to get it and to hear it. The minute I plugged it in, it was like, there it is. It's great. I used it on a John Mellencamp record immediately.
And when we made the prototype, I called him, I said, I think we need to name this the McCarty guitar, because it's reflective of so many things that Ted McCarty had then taught us.
I think as they made the decision to sort of make a model out of this guitar, and I was kind of uncomfortable with the thought at the time of having my name on an instrument, and Paul suggested that we sort of give credit and pay tribute to Ted.
This is our McCarty model. The McCarty model was born from things that David Grissom, one of our endorsers from Texas, wanted in a guitar. He wanted a guitar that sounded like Duane Allman live at the Fillmore. And it turns out all the things he was asking for were the same things that Ted was teaching me about what he had done in the 50s. The guitar has a thicker body, a Michigan maple top, a McCarty bridge that's intonated for modern strings, pickups very similar or almost exactly the same really as what Ted made in the 50s, a lightweight headstock, a neck built for tone and a big strong feel, and a faded sunburst. We're very proud of this guitar. It's a favorite of our artists.
I think it was a great idea to name it after Ted. I thought that was really fitting, given that all these things that I was going for were things that happened under his leadership.
He was generous with his idea that we gave it the McCarty moniker.
Naming a guitar, the McCarty guitar that Paul did, surprised us more than anything that he was willing to do that, to make a guitar and put my father's name on it. I think my father was amazed. We were all surprised because he just didn't feel that he was particularly famous or that anybody would really particularly know or particularly care.
One day Paul met me at the trade show in New York when he talked about guitars, and he said, how about if we make a Ted McCarty guitar? And I said, well, perhaps it would be fine. I would be very thrilled and honored to have one of your guitars with my name on it. But who's going to buy them? Because I'm not a musician. I don't go around and play guitars. And so Paul said that he didn't think I knew quite the reputation that I had. So I said, well, if he wants to do it, I'll go along with him, and sure. So we signed a contract.
They worked out it's a very simple contract at the time, and my father said, yes, you can use my name, and we all agreed that was fine. He was always amazed that anybody would care that his name was on the guitar.
In 1994, we brought the McCarty guitar to the market, And we unveiled it at the NAMM show in Anaheim, and Ted McCarty joined us at the booth. And all of a sudden, the entire industry lined up like the biggest artist signing you've ever seen. I guess it helped me to understand the impact that that man had on our entire industry, not just Gibson. And it was neat that so many people that I respected, I remember Sammy Ash was there, just people that I revered from our industry were there to revere him. And that was really cool.
We had a press conference at the NAMM show that January. And he presented me with the first Ted McCarty guitar.
I remember when he held the first McCarty guitar, he had had early surgery for fixing a dislocated retina, and they had turned the laser up too high, so he only had peripheral vision left. And he looked at the guitar and he put his hands around it, he looked at it so he could see it, you know, on the periphery of his vision. He goes, "Nice guitar. I approve."
And there had been 100 of the first model already produced, and they were being offered for sale at the trade show. And the next day, which was Sunday, I went down to the trade show early and was talking to Paul, and I said, "Paul, I know you made 100 of these guitars. Did anybody buy any of them?" And he said, "They're all gone." He decided to make a Ted McCarty guitar, and I'm very proud of having it on there now and being a part of the PRS Guitar Company.
Then we started selling McCarty guitars like crazy. The dealers were selling them on the internet. The internet had just started, and people trusted the quality, so they were willing to buy them on the internet sight unseen.
I think the McCarty model is the ultimate like classic guitar. It's just clean and simple and comfortable and warm and beautiful sounding.
All of those conversations that really started between Paul and Ted, the things that led to a 22 fret neck, the things that led to vintage style tuners, the thing that led to the Grissom guitar, the DGT, listening to different alloys of steel and comparing the notes and the tone and the sustain of all of those things. All those things that we do are really a result of Paul and Ted having those early conversations. So it starts with the McCarty model, but then that just creates a new foundation for something to be built upon. And the 594 is that evolutionary process of a guitar that started with McCarty, and then it goes to the McCarty 594.
We had the original McCarty model, which had been very successful. We had several different variations with different types of neck wood and top wood and body wood, several different models that had been successful for a long time. The culture of this place has always been to improve the quality of the instrument, to continue to move forward. Paul is not one to stand on a design if he feels like there's an improvement that can be made.
The first McCarty model to me made absolute sense. It was what Paul was learning from Ted. The thicker body, the thinner neck, the mass of the tuning pegs, the bridge, all of that was it was derivative of the conversations that Paul and Ted were having. The 594, I think, was the culmination of all of that. The 594 was at the point to where that guitar was designed, it was all of those nuggets that Paul had received from Ted that had matured, had been percolating for all of those years, and it came to the surface in that one instrument at that time. If you look at that guitar and break it apart into all of its component levels, I can take every piece of that guitar and tie it back to the original conversations that Paul was having with Ted, and that original McCarty for that matter. Just through time and knowledge and advancement and evolution, it became better and better and better.
So the McCarty 594 versus the McCarty, the major difference is, we've voiced pickups for it, but it's the two-piece bridge and the scale length and the switching configuration. So it kind of nailed this historic tone that we were going after at the time.
When we came out with the McCarty 594, we were looking to go a little more in the vintage direction and play to some of the players that were used to a 4-knob setup with a through-way toggle on the upper bout. Tons of players, that was home for them.
The 594 is right up Ted McCarty alley. It wasn't exactly what he made, but it's close in how the scale length was, how the neck shape was, how the sound was, how the bridge was. It's modern, old school guitar making like they did in the 50s, just using the new tools.
I do feel like the McCarty models that we've released over the years honor Ted's legacy. He knew that they were incredible instruments and that they were beautiful and lovingly crafted. To have your name put on something like that has got to make you feel good.
Bringing him to the NAMM show, the trips to the Smithsonian when we were put into the American History Museum, the Hard Rock Cafe, the entire industry come to pay their respects to him. That was an amazing gift that Paul gave to Ted, I think.
He was interested in doing things with me and was surprised to find out that I was being selected to become a member of the Rock Walk of Fame in Hollywood, California, and I had to go there and have my handprints put in the cement.
We got a call from the Guitar Center people that they wanted Ted McCarty to put his hands in the cement for Rock Walk. They wanted Ted McCarty to be part of the history of the guitar in their Rock Walk. And Ted liked the idea, so we went.
I was very flattered with this, and I met a number of outstanding musicians.
So they get to go and put his hands in the cement, which he really enjoyed doing, and there were some other musicians there who were really very famous, whose names I can't remember at the moment, but that wanted my father's autograph, and my children were just astounded that those people would want his autograph instead of my father getting their autograph.
Eddie Van Halen was there that day. He was a sweetheart. He was very involved with Guitar Center.
Even the grandchildren have been a little bit surprised and have been interested in the people that care.
Paul made sure that Ted McCarty got his moment, which is awesome. Paul kind of like pulled him out of a corner and said that here's the guy. This is the reason we're all able to do what it is that we do. And I think that's amazing that he recognized that and really did something about it, did a lot about it.
The Smithsonian decided to put a Dragon on display, and the Levin family paid for the guitar, which I thought was really cool. It was donated to the Smithsonian.
In '94, he invited me to come to Annapolis, and we went up to Washington, D.C., and one of his guitars was being put on display at the Smithsonian Institute, and he wanted me there.
To have one of your guitars in the Smithsonian is a pretty big deal, and I think Paul wanted to share that with Ted, which was, a really neat thing to do.
Paul really cherished his relationship with Ted. It was a meaningful relationship. They were friends as well as mentor and mentee, Whenever something big happened with the company, he always wanted Ted to be there.
And he arranged to have all of his employees taken to Washington, D.C. from Annapolis by bus to see this instrument on display.
Having this crew going to the Smithsonian in a yellow school bus was pretty fun.
Taking 450 people by bus now would be a different animal. I mean, it wasn't, there were like 40 of us or 50 of us at the time.
He rented buses and we all went up to see the exhibit, which featured, historic pre-war Martins, and Prince Cloud guitar was there.
The other part of it is I'm the one who painted that Dragon. I'm the one who wrote on the back of the Dragon. So for me, being an art school kid, to paint something that went in the Smithsonian was just like mind-blowing. That's something you can tell your parents and your family, and you can kind of brag about that. And even to take my son to go see, it's pretty satisfying.
For this little teeny guitar company to be the thing when you go into the American History Museum and is sitting right there as you go through the metal detector was unbelievable. But I thought, you know, that was the Smithsonian was a legend, and to have one of our products in it was extraordinary.
And while we were there, we were looking at this big display of heritage and famous guitars, and several of the Gibson guitars that I had had a hand in. And we looked around, and lo and behold, a couple of my patents were on display in the Smithsonian Institute, which made me very proud and very happy to know that because never in my life had I ever thought that there'd ever be anything of that nature in the Smithsonian Institute that would have my name on it.
So I get a call from Steve Routhier, and they want to put a McCarty guitar on top of the Hard Rock Cafe in Baltimore. Of course, we signed the document immediately, give them permission, and the guitar was made by a sign maker from Las Vegas. But you know, the signs in Las Vegas are huge, right? This thing was immense. It was really something. The first time I saw it, I went, wow, that's cool.
I remember the first time driving into town and seeing that thing on the building was sort of a mind-bending kind of thing. And I just went and looked at the headstock, and I have made 1,000 of those headstocks and sanded 1,000 of those bodies, and seeing that, you know, in larger than life in Baltimore was pretty crazy. And I know Ted was very proud of that.
I'm from Baltimore, and I'm a city kid. Went to school in the city, went to college in the city. So I was always down there. So it was always a good point of reference for me. I'd go down there and hang out with my friends. And then, you know, when I started at PRS, and they decided they were going to put this ginormous guitar down there. I mean, that was really something wild, something I haven't seen before. And it was a way that I could tell people that had no idea what PRS was, that were from the city. I would say, you know, the guitar they just put on the power plant, that place.
Turns out there was a kind of a complaint that they didn't want a guitar up in the downtown skyline. And when they made it Hometown Guitar Company, the complaint was over. So it could have easily been something else, but I thought what the Hard Rock did to make sure that that guitar was on top of their building was brilliant, and it helped us.
There was a big party and Paul's band played, and it was, you know, it was just kind of an honor for a young company to have been anointed with this 200-foot tall PRS in Baltimore on the Hard Rock Cafe.
You can't miss it. And it was such a focal point and part of the skyline that it's not like any other building. You have this giant guitar there that has defined what Baltimore looks like. It's not just a billboard. It's an electric neon guitar, and people talk about it all the time. They always will.
It's an unfortunate thing that many people are not recognized for their gifts until after they've left this planet. It's cool that Paul saw to it that Ted was recognized for what he did while he was still alive and able to appreciate that.
I remember when Paul got a package from him, and I was there when he opened it up, and there was a handwritten letter, but inside this package were some of Ted's patents that are now in Paul's safe. He gifted those to Paul.
And inside was the Les Paul patent, the Flying V patent, the Explorer patent, the Tunematic Bridge patent. I mean, these weren't copies. I was holding the originals, and he gave them to me. I was like, wow.
I think that maybe he thought they wouldn't be meaningful to, you know, some other people that he might be inclined to give them to, and he knew that they were meaningful to Paul. Within those patents, there was a lot of information that went into making those guitars that were part of what he had relayed to Paul over the years. So it's like things that he learned when designing this were things that he taught Paul.
It was the only set of papers I ever held where I shook. It was like the Dead Sea Scrolls of the guitar business. Believe me, if I handed them to you right now, you'd go, that's cool. It was cool.
Through the years when Paul would talk about Ted, it was always with an air of respect and this fond looking back on the past and their relationship. I think over the years of me getting closer to Paul and hearing those stories more and more, it kind of shifted from a practical series of questions that he would ask Ted and talk more of him, and he just sounded like he was a friend, you know, that he would tell me about going to visit him, and sometimes it was less about the guitar making question he was asking and more about just the sheer joy that Paul felt of hanging out with somebody who did all the things that Ted did.
He was a champion, an industry icon, a leader, a friend, a mentor. He was really exceptional.
Paul brought Ted to NAMM to show him around and help him get a little more recognition, showing him people and people recognizing who he was and that he was a legend. I think it made Ted feel good.
Everybody wanted to do an interview with Ted McCarty. That was a big deal. He was not young, and so he would be almost asleep in between meetings, and we would whisper it. When he came to NAMM, we'd whisper in his ear, "Time for an interview, Ted." And he'd go, and he'd wake up, and he'd do the whole meeting and fall back asleep. He was a champion. He would bring himself to moments. For me, it was an honor and fun to bring him to all the NAMM shows. I did have a sense that I was his caretaker in those moments and that I was his host. As a matter of fact, he used to room with me in my room. I used to take care of him. It was very intimate in terms of, you know, making sure that the journalist could have his time, making sure that he was taken care of, making sure that he was treated like the king that he was, making sure that his knowledge base had a reverence to it and people treated him well.
I think Paul almost felt like my father was a grandfather to him. I think Paul really appreciated my father in a way that somebody else really didn't. And he did many things for my father that my father appreciated more than I can tell you.
This video, Remembering Ted, I think is the right thing to do. It's on time. And Ted was kind of like the grandfather I never had. They allowed me to be at his bedside with a guitar, sang him songs while he was passing away. It was really sweet. In the end, he was family. I was the one that got to wheel him around in the wheelchair the last time at NAMM, and people came out of their booths to say goodbye because they knew it was the last time they were going to see him. He was the forgotten man who wasn't forgotten when he left NAMM the last time. He was sharp as a tack till the second he died. Just razor sharp.
The last time I saw Ted was at a 4th of July event that PRS was a big part of, in charge of the music, and Paul asked me to play the Star Spangled Banner. I remember starting the song, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ted get up, stand up, and put his hat over his heart. And it was just a very touching moment. And it was all these thoughts were going through my mind as I was trying to remember the right notes to play. And I remember Ted was old school. He was a gentleman. His work ethic was unrivaled, I think. And the universal respect that people in the industry had for Ted spoke to what kind of man he was. And so it was an emotional day, and unfortunately that was the last time I saw Ted, but he did write me a note once and said thank you for your help on the McCarty model, and just a true gentleman.
I remember obviously when he passed away, I remember the company. Paul was obviously suffering that loss. And even people that didn't have a deep relationship with Ted, I would say we collectively suffered that loss. You know, there was a understanding through the company of his importance. There was a photograph that we had, and all of us that were working here then signed that photograph with a little note to him. And it was a moment for sure. It was a pretty heavy thing.
The sign on the wall when you walk up the stairs at PRS says, "God bless Ted McCarty." So it's kind of the way it was. We all signed it. You know, if somebody passes away in their 60s or their 50s, it can be very painful. but he was in his 90s. And I went to his 90th birthday party, and there were all 70-year-olds there. I said, what happened to all your friends? He says, I outlived them all. I had to trade him in on 70-year-olds. He didn't have any of his friends. He'd outlived all of them. And that I had to really get my head wrapped around. But you know something? I got to watch a champion in his last quarter of the football game. I don't know. I didn't handle his death very well. It hurt a lot more than I was willing to admit, and I had to deal with it maybe 5 or 6 years after he died. I finally dealt with it. I think it was such a natural thing when he passed away because he was so old that it didn't feel wrong, but I did miss him. But every word I said in this interview is true and heartfelt.
I think my father's legacy, shall we call it, is really very well known in the musical world, particularly the guitar world, more than I would have expected. And I think probably what my father would have hoped for. So I think he was always very pleased that Paul became the avenue for his achievements to become recognized. I think my father knew they were good things he had come up with, good ideas, good innovations, but I don't know that he felt that anybody really appreciated them. So to him then, well, if they're not appreciated, they must not be all that important.
I think Ted is not underappreciated at all by people who know what he did and are aware of him. I think he's very, very, he's revered in that regard. But again, I don't think Ted really wanted to be in the spotlight. And I think he just wanted to make great guitars. It wasn't like about him for him. And I think he was quite comfortable playing somewhat of a background role in terms of publicity.
So to me, it's an honor that we were fortunate enough to be able to work with Ted McCarty. Again, it's that like detail and passion that he had just, rolls downhill into Paul and then into everyone here. I look at PRS as like a perpetual startup, and I think that drive and innovative energy just keeps propelling us to move forward, and I think Ted would be pretty proud of where we are today.
I really feel like this group of people under Paul's leadership, we've kind of carried that same spirit on, and it's really great to have Ted's namesake as kind of part of that history continuing on as well in the McCarty guitar.
One thing I really admire about Paul and PRS is that we've kept such a close relationship with Ted's family after he passed. It would be so easy to not stay connected to the family, to just say, we make McCarty instruments and keep on doing that. But the fact that Paul had such a personal relationship with Ted that went way beyond business, I've heard him say he's like a grandfather to him, and to take a relationship like that and make sure that the integrity of that is maintained by staying in contact with the family, is one of the reasons why I love working here.
I didn't really understand how much Ted McCarty Sue Davis carries until she came here to do the filming for this video. I thought that there was a real reverence for her in the factory when they figured out who she was. I thought it was cool. And when I introduced her as Ted McCarty's daughter, people would go, really? Wow, so nice to meet you. I mean, it's such an honor. She carries such a legacy,
I think all through my father's association with Paul, he recognized that Paul really cared about him as a person. And when he came out, when my father was at the end of his life, I think he really appreciated that Paul made the effort to be there. And I think it was a very close and, if you will, loving relationship. Far exceeded the business relationship. That's how it struck me.
Ted McCarty was probably the personification of the teacher and Paul the student. From my perspective, Paul has been a teacher since the day I met him, and he's been a student since the day I met him. So he's been always both. I was fortunate to come into the company near the very beginning of it, but I came in as an entry-level position, building guitars. I was coming into a company as an ex-musician and ex-roofer construction person who was a sponge of knowledge, and Paul was my teacher. So in 1985, Paul taught me how to use a bandsaw. Paul taught me why it is that you can't rush neck manufacturing. When I was making necks in 1987, I vividly remember him coming back and yelling at me because I was taking too little material off of a neck blank on a 45 relief cut, and him just livid that I would be changing the process because it would make the neck go through a little bit faster. But to his credit, he took the time to tell me why that what I was doing was compromising the instrument, and it was a teaching moment for him. When Paul was by himself in a shop making guitars one by one, it was probably as easy as it was ever going to get for him. And as the company grew and more of us came into the company, the amount of education that he had to impart was huge. So teaching not only how to make an instrument well, but why it is that you make an instrument the way that you make it to make it a good instrument, that is a high order, and he did a great job. He was a fantastic teacher. He still is a fantastic teacher.
Paul is, he has been a student of guitars and guitar building. I think that one of the things I came to find out about Ted, the creativity that he brought in some of these designs and patterns, was geared towards advancing the guitar and trying to take care of problems or address stuff that artists had related to him that they would like to see as improvements on the guitar. So there's a lot of similarities. My years with working with Paul, I look at the work that Paul has done with different aspects of the guitars over the year, our improvements on bridge design, nut design, and I think, to a large degree, Ted McCarty was trying to do the same thing in the early 50s and really throughout the golden era of electric guitar manufacturing.
I think Paul is kind of carrying on the legacy of Ted and Leo. I mean, I think he is the Leo Fender, the Ted McCarty of our generation. I can't really think of anybody else who has had the impact in our generation on electric guitar making as Paul. I mean, he's definitely carrying that tradition on. Having worked closely with him for almost 40 years now, I think I'm qualified to say that.
I've learned a lot about guitar building in the 36 years I've been here, and that is in large part due to Paul wanting to share. In the same way that Ted was Paul's mentor, I think Paul is a mentor to all of us here. He shares information on stuff. He wants to teach. He teaches us all stuff all the time. If he discovers something new, he wants to tell people, to share that information. And now, he's been teaching us things just so that if he's ever not here, we know more about what goes on in his mind.
I've had the opportunity to learn directly from Paul Smith as I was working here on the line. And then he's gone out of his way to schedule time with people who work here on how to build electric guitars and why we have done all the things we have done and the elements of design and electronics and the type of materials that we use. And been a real mentor in guitar building to me and all the associates that work here.
I've had the great fortune to be at the factory many times, and I've never been at the factory where Paul hasn't taught me something. And he's very eager to show me new things that PRS is doing to improve. And I know that his passion today to improve and find, it's the relentless pursuit of tone. That passion hasn't dimmed, and he's still got the same hunger to make things right, and will go the extra mile is an understatement, the extra 1,000 miles to help me get, if I have a request for, could we make it a little more like this or a little more like that, or I'm having a slight issue here, he will immediately, it's like I get the feeling he's going to drop everything and get right on it.
The thing that ties Paul and Ted together so much to me is the sheer joy that I imagine that Ted felt and that I absolutely know that Paul feels when somebody asks them about their life's work. When we are doing anything with product development, I will always ask Paul why we're doing something or get him to explain something to me, because I want to know why Paul wants to do it. I want Paul Reed Smith to explain that to me personally, because what a missed opportunity that would be if I didn't. And every time I do that, he'll come into my office, he grabs a whiteboard marker, and he draws me a picture, and he's writing numbers on the board. And before any of that starts, he always says, "I'm so glad you asked me that," because he loves to pass on his knowledge.
Look, anybody over 50 wants to teach. The student is in a very powerful position, because if you ask somebody who's an expert over 50 and you go, "Can you teach me?" They go, "Who are you?" And then when they figure that out, they go, "Okay, I'll teach," because they don't want to die and have their gems of knowledge not be passed on. They don't want that. And Ted was a prime example of that. He wanted his knowledge base to be passed on, and he decided to pass it on to us, which I loved. That was great.
Sometimes I have to remind myself how cool it is that I work at PRS Guitars at the same time that Paul Reed Smith is working at PRS Guitars. I imagine Paul had to have felt the same way about Ted, that he could be alive at a time when he could call up this man and ask him any question he wanted.
Ted was a great teacher in his own right. Paul kind of picked it up at this level and has escalated it. After nearly 40 years of being around the guy, he's still teaching me something every day. We're still discovering things all the time.
In reality, Paul is sort of my Ted McCarty. He is constantly being the teacher here. And it's not one-on-one. We have guitar classes here where he'll pull a whole team up, sit in the break room for an hour and go over something that he learned.
He'll usually start with something that he wants to talk about, but then he also just invites everyone to ask questions to kind of pick the topic for the next session, because he really thinks that it is part of his job not only to kind of lead the company and work on guitars, but to teach all of us how to keep doing that.
And it's nice because we're learning things that maybe we didn't consider before. And for him to be able to do that, like I said, and then pass it on to us, you know, that kind of cements his legacy and hopefully makes him comfortable that when he does go on vacation, you know, he doesn't have to worry so much.
More and more and more and more now, my job has been teaching of what I know about making guitars, teaching what I know about the history of our business, the teaching of what the McCarty relationship is, teaching. But I also learned a huge amount from the people I'm talking to. It's not one-sided, it's two-way. I don't want it to be one way.
Ted is a part of our foundation. He's in the essence of us. As we continue to grow the company and evolve and create new instruments, he's fundamental in our thought processes of building great instruments. Ted will always be a part of the story of PRS Guitars as it goes forward.